Thank you, Joe. And we don't. What we need to do is we need to think about what we're trying to do and how we want to do it. And tonight, what I want to do is I want to introduce somebody to you who figured out exactly how to do that. How do you actually go from nothing and actually build something that actually gives you a viable product that you can actually promote and put on the market? But not just that, what I want you to do is also pay attention to some of the characteristics of people who actually want to go out and do these things. The other thing I want to do is I also want to take a moment to introduce you to the organization that actually gives people all of the resources they need to be able to do all of the things that are going to be discussed tonight. And that's Black and Brown Founders. The executive director of Black and Brown Founders is Del Medina. Del is awesome. I've known Del for a few years now. I think it's actually more than a few years, but I won't push it. But what you're going to find with Del and with Aniyia is that these are people who don't necessarily live in our community, but these are people who will absolutely reach out to you across the coast, from coast to coast, and give you some practical, very solid knowledge on how to move your concepts forward, how to move your business forward, and how to make sure that you have an opportunity to make something happen with the things that you're trying to work with. So we're going to understand one thing as a premise. Nobody on this call has a silver spoon in their mouth. Nobody on this call had the opportunity to say, oh, my daddy has $100,000 he can give me. Not. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that as a starting point. And I want to be able to take this moment to introduce to you Miss Aniyia Williams. She's the founder of B&B, Black and Brown Founders, but she's also had other entrepreneurial ventures that she's put her hands in and has been very successful with. And she'll talk about a lot of these things today, but I'm going to let her give you her background and a little bit more about who she is. Aniyia?
Yes, so thank you for having me. I am excited to be here. I'm excited to talk to everyone. I'm going to go through this presentation and I'm going to try to get through it relatively fast so we can have some time to discuss and answer questions. I also want to give a nod to Del Medina, who is the executive director of BBF. Del and I essentially started the organization together back in 2017, which feels like a very long time ago, especially in pandemic years. But I formerly was the executive director. I now serve as the board chair of Black and Brown Founders. So it continues to be an act and service of love on the part of everyone who's on the team, who are out here trying to help Black and Brown folks start tech and tech-enabled businesses. So let's get into it, shall we? Hi, I'm Aniyia Williams, and I am going to start by sharing just a little bit about me. As you can see from this photo, I'm actually a classically trained opera singer. I don't know if you saw my Twitter handle on the first slide, which is Opera Queenie. That's what I am on all the social medias. I went to Kappa. I'm from Philly originally. I went to Kappa. I'm a Penn State alum, studied music for a big chunk of my life. And then after I graduated from college with my music degree, I wanted to try to find a job that would have slightly more stability than performing for my paycheck and had health insurance and those kinds of things. I actually ended up working at an arts nonprofit in the DC area called Wolf Trap Foundation. I went into working on their fundraising team. And while I lived in DC, I met a guy and he is a software engineer. He was working in the tech industry at the time. As a web developer. He is now my husband, if you fast forward 13 years ago from then. But there was a point when we were together after a few years, he got recruited to work at a startup in San Francisco to move from DC to California, which was the beginning of me working in tech. And that is why I live in California today. I found myself at this startup called Voxer, that made a walkie-talkie app for smartphones. And I learned a lot about the technology industry very quickly, and just kind of started to fill in these different gaps that they had. Like, one of the things that's important to know about startups, and especially if you end up starting your own business, that you'll quickly learn, is that there are always more things to do than there are people to do them. And in the land of startups, if you see an opening and a thing that needs to be done, a problem that needs to be solved, and you decide to insert yourself in that place and solve that problem, and that adds like immense value to the company, very often that will become your job. And so I went from working as a part-time office manager at Voxer to, a few years later, I was the head of marketing on the executive team there. And that was around the time that I got this idea that I just could not shake. I had this thing burning a hole in my brain I had to make happen. And it was that I wanted to make tech jewelry for women. Namely, I wanted to make a necklace that could transform into headphones. And so I started this company called Tinsel. I legit went to the boss of the company that I had, the CEO, who it turned out was a very successful person who had co-founded a company that was very successful before he started the one that I was working at. And you know, after I shared my ideas and my plans, I put together kind of a rough business plan and talked to him about it. He decided to take a chance on me and gave me some initial investment to start a company that at the time was literally just an idea in my head. And as you can see from this picture, we were able to make it a real thing. Designed it from scratch. We crowdfunded it. We manufactured the product in China, and we shipped it. We called it the Dipper Audio Necklace in 2016. I got a utility patent for that, which is pretty cool. So I'm also technically a US inventor. And we got to get it around the necks of hundreds of women. It was, I wish it could have been thousands and millions, but the arc of that story ended up being shorter than I wanted. But we are going to use Tinsel as our kind of case study today to talk about launching businesses with modest resources. But I learned a lot from the experience, and it set me on a new mission. One was helping more underestimated, underrepresented people create tech businesses, which is what led me to start Black and Brown Founders. And that was around the time that I met Del Medina, who was running a program at the time for another nonprofit called Code 2040. And I was an entrepreneur in residence there. And it was many of the conversations that I had had with Del and many of the epiphanies that Del helped me have that helped me realize that this was something that was very much needed and that I should do. I mean, I discovered just the abysmal rate that Black and Latinx entrepreneurs were getting funded at compared to their counterparts. And I wanted to provide a culturally competent, we'll just say it that way, this is my politically correct term, way to help them launch businesses with modest resources. So that was the kind of part of the inception of Black and Brown Founders. The other mission that set me on was starting another organization that propped up around the same time called Zebras Unite. And in this picture are my co-founders for Zebras Unite. And that was so that we could create a more ethical and sustainable startup ecosystem, really looking at the kind of funding structures. Like, you know, a lot of people in the tech industry get funding from venture capital. So looking at alternatives to venture capital, looking at alternative corporate structures, and just looking at the culture around tech and startups and figuring out how we could help build a better world. So these lovely women in the picture with me, Mata, Astrid, Jennifer, are all people who I've been on another journey with alongside the one for Black and Brown Founders. And, you know, as you think about building your own business, there are a lot of things that you have to consider in today's landscape around ethics and around inclusivity and around sustainability. In the startup ecosystem, a lot of people like to talk about moving fast and breaking things, which is a vibe, but also when you get to be the size of like, I don't know, Facebook, Google, breaking things could mean the end of American democracy, and you want to have accountability for those things. And so organizations like Zebras are trying to help people really think through those ramifications when they're very early in their journey, and making sure that people aren't going to kind of end up with business models that, if your business is wildly successful, ruins the fabric of society. Very important not to do that. So back to the Black and Brown Founders thing. So this is me with Arlen Hamilton. This was actually the very first Black and Brown Founders event that we did. And this was the first time that Arlen Hamilton, if any of you know who Arlen Hamilton, she's like one of the most visible, probably the most visible Black female venture capitalists out there today. This is the first time that Arlen spoke on a stage. Now she gets paid like tens of thousands of dollars to speak on people's stages. So I'm like, I get to claim that I did it first. Anyway, but this just really opened my eyes. I think that the big thing that I learned when we did the very first event was that there are just incredible people who look like us, who are all come with some special piece of the puzzle, all come with some special experience, all come with some special skills, all come with their own networks. That can become viable businesses. And folks just kind of need to understand how those things can come together. Whether folks were going to get funding or not, they were going to build their things anyway. And so, knowing people who had experience with marketing, building products, if you're not like wanting to launch a tech company without being a technical person, doing design, doing the operations of your business, everyone had discovered some piece of how to get things done with modest resources. And I wanted to try to put together resources and events that would help give that to other people, and help folks get from idea to launch. So just to kind of sum that up in terms of what BBF does, and then we'll get into the meat of this, is that we help provide community education and access to Black and Latinx entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I will also say is that we are really also welcoming to other people who want to be part of our community and take part in our programs as well. But our content and our lens is specifically through the experience that Black and Latinx people have specifically in the United States. And, this is our work and our way of doing a small part in trying to narrow that wealth gap that exists today. Okay, so let's talk about entrepreneurship. Now, I think that the big thing to know, and maybe some of you have talked about this in your other sessions, but good money can be made, by working for someone else, right? Like that's a key part of what enabled me to quit my job and start Tinsel. You also want to, you want to be able to stack your paper if you have paper to stack. But also there are good and important connections that you can make when you work for other businesses. And you can also learn the inner workings of how these companies operate, which is also really important when you're thinking about starting your own business. You can learn their strengths, you can learn their weaknesses. And it's not always obvious, but every business always has some kind of an Achilles heel. And being able to have insight into that and the things that you feel like they do well and the things that they don't do well are always going to be lessons that you can borrow and take into your own business. Learning what they're afraid of, learning what opportunities they're leaving on the table. Those are opportunities that you might be able to step into in creating your own thing. And I say all of this because I want to say that there is also, a benefit to thinking about working for someone else, even if for a short period of time. Or temporarily, maybe you come in and out, right? But ownership overall, I believe, is a really key pathway to economic security. Entrepreneurs hold 37% of all the wealth in the United States, and that's more than 1/3. And entrepreneurship is liberation in many ways. It provides people with the agency and the ability to live the life that they want to live for themselves. And that can look lots of different ways. You don't have to be working full-time on a business to be a business owner or to be an entrepreneur. You can be doing it full-time, but you can also be doing it as a side hustle. You can be moonlighting after you're finished your day job and starting to work on it then. These are all possibilities for you. The end goal is that you want to create a business that is making money and turning a profit. So today, I'm going to give a quick overview to just one approach to launching a business when you're cash strapped. And this general framework is what we teach folks in Black and Brown Founders Bootstrapping Bootcamp. I want to see all of y'all head over to the Black and Brown Founders website. If you haven't got it pulled up right now, you're on a device if you're watching me talk. So like like literally blackandbrownfounders.com, .org, bbfounders.co, all of those will take you to the place you're trying to go. And you should go and check out our bootcamp. We have scholarships available. Del, maybe you can talk a little bit about that after I'm finished talking. So there's no excuses. You can just get the in-depth version of this and reach out to our team if you're looking for extra coaching. But this is all informed by, oh, look, Del just put the link in there. You don't even have to type it, just click that button. And you'll see that this is kind of the approach that we talk about with entrepreneurs. All right, so the quick overview, I'm gonna like go through the things and then I'll get into the meat of it. So 1 is gather info, 2 is gather people, 3 is prototype, 4 is monetize, and 5 is execute and iterate. Iterate is a word that people in tech like to use a lot. It just essentially means that you are constantly learning and going back and making changes along the way, that you don't have to have everything finished and fixed and perfect before it is the final thing, that you realize it's always going to be a work in progress and it's always changing and you're always making changes to it. So the first step, gather info. Before you start working on your idea, whatever your idea is, you should have a real conversation with yourself about what your emotional and financial readiness is going to be to jump into this and what you actually want to achieve. So some questions that you might ask yourself is, how many hours do you want to be working? How much money do you want to be making? Like, do you personally? How much money do you have right now? What is the minimum amount of money that you could live off of month to month? And how low will you let your bank account get before you have to change course, right? And then you want to kind of assess these different kinds of things. There's something that we do in the Bootstrapping Bootcamp called the Ideal Day exercise, where we essentially help you go through a visioning exercise to imagine what your perfect day would be like from the day you open your eyes, the moment you open your eyes to the moment you lay back down to go to sleep, and what happens, and then breaking down what kind of things were needed in order to make that day real, so that you can actually even come up with a number that will help you understand that this is the goal of how much you need your business to make. This is how many staff you need. These are the kinds of things you have to have launched. And so these are like really important visioning exercises, because at the end of the day, I mentioned like entrepreneurship, these businesses, this is a kind of a pathway toward liberation. If you are not getting the things, if this is not helping you live the life that you want to live, do not start a business. And like, I say that, I'm kind of laughing, but I'm not kidding. Seriously, like building a business is very hard. You should only be doing this if this is in service of something that you really want to get out of life. I mean, maybe it can be fun at times, but it is lots of times not fun, more than it is fun. But the thing that should be giving you the energy to keep pushing on is that it is providing the things that you need and that you want from this life. So going back and assessing your hopes and dreams against this idea of what your business model is going to be. Business model is really just to say, what is the way in which your company makes money? What is the product, and how are you exchanging your good or service with people so that they're giving you money? What are they paying you for? Because there's this whole thing in the tech industry where people kind of talk about, scalable businesses versus lifestyle businesses. And I think for it's a trap to kind of fall into those conversations. Neither one of them is better than the other. At the end of the day, it's going to depend on what it is that you want, right? And some of those things like that are kind of lifestyle businesses are not the kinds of businesses that a lot of investors are going to go looking for, at least not the traditional kind of investors that you read about in newspapers and see on podcasts or any of those kinds of things. But we are seeing a growing interest from everyday individuals who do want to invest in smaller businesses and want to try to help achieve impact at a scale that might seem smaller than the $1 billion+ businesses that are coming out of Silicon Valley, but that can still have an incredible impact in the communities that they're functioning in. So I just wanted to make sure that I kind of point that part out. And then I think, like, to kind of go back to this idea of community, one of the other things that we really try to drive home with the boot camp and the things that we teach Black and Brown founders is that you want to solve a problem for a community that you're a part of or that you have meaningful access to. Gathering people is to really start building community, right? You want to gather your people around you, not your friends, in terms of like who you're going to make money for. I'm like, that's also important, because like your friends are always going to want the friends and family discount. You want people who are going to pay full price for the thing that you are offering, because this is a business and you want it to stay in business. So thinking about the people that you want to gather around you is also thinking about who are you in relationship with or in community with that has a problem that you can solve, that people will pay to solve that, right? It could be people that you go to church with. It could be people that, maybe are your colleagues that you're working with today. It could be people that you might play basketball with on the weekends and you want to sell them socks. I don't know. It could be anything, but really making sure that you have identified a group of folks that are going to be your customers and they're going to pay you full price for whatever it is that you're selling them. And you want to capture their information pretty early on, just in terms of how you start to create a list that you can kind of communicate with, right? Because you want to start talking to those people. You want to start talking to them about the problem that you want to solve. You want to start talking to them about other issues that might sort of sit in the neighborhood of that problem. And you want to get on Instagram, you want to get on Twitter, you want to get on Medium, Facebook, YouTube, whatever it is, you want to start talking about these things and talking about that problem that you want to solve, so that people will kind of hear and find you. And the folks that you might not directly be connected to initially, that it might start to reach these larger networks in terms of folks that are also looking for the answers or for the solution to the thing that you might be working on. So just thinking about how you can create interesting, meaningful stories and content that people can engage with. And then when they come to you, that they're going to give you their email address or their phone number or whatever, so that you can text them or email them and let them know when something's going down or when your product is ready, is something you want to start doing from day one. Like even before you have a product, like start selling the sizzle of the problem and the solution that you are offering. You want to keep them excited and interested and engaging them with some frequency. Okay. The other thing is, I'll say step 3 is like once and also while you are building, you want to have, that community, but you want to start building the prototype. This is going to be the actual thing that you come out the gate selling. And I think like one of the important things to note is that we see a lot of entrepreneurs who are so deathly afraid of getting it wrong or not having it be pretty or not having it polished, that they don't launch until it's too late, right? There's a very popular, I think it's Reid Hoffman, one of the founders of LinkedIn, quote that is something like, that you, oh my gosh, I can't remember the quote, but it's something like, if you feel good about, like, if you're not embarrassed by the product that you just launched, then you launch too late, right? So you might feel like it's not the perfect thing, it's not going to have all the bells and whistles from the beginning, but that's not what's most important, right? Before you actually get to a place where you know all the answers to why people are showing up and giving you money, then like your job is to answer these 3 questions. And this is like something that Tara Reid from Apps Without Code says all the time. The first question is, does anyone want this? The second question is, what features of what it is that thing does, the service, the product, whatever, what is important to people about it? Like, why are they paying you that money, right? And the other thing is like, will they actually pay you the money? So maybe I should reverse those. So it's like, does anyone want this? Will they pay you money for it? And like, why are they paying you money? And until you know the 3 answers to that question, then like you're like, that is your job, is to find the answers to those questions. So there's lots of different kinds of tools out there to help you build prototypes, to help you get something off the ground. You can kind of create a patchwork of different things that can be a service that will help you get something in front of people and help them start interacting with it. That doesn't even involve you having to have any technical experience if it's like a software product. If you're doing something that is a little bit more like, I don't know, you can have a business that's making cakes. You can still be thinking of this in the same way. Like, who are you selling your cakes to? Why do they want your cakes, right? Those are the things that are going to kind of become part of your secret sauce. Those are going to be part of the things that are going to help you differentiate yourself from other people who are going to be like, oh, well, I sell cakes too, where you can have that thing where like they might have the recipe, but the sauce don't taste the same. They're going to come back for your cakes, but you have to know why they come for your cakes, right? So those 3 questions: does anyone want this? Will they pay me money for it? Why are they paying me money? And I think that you can get really creative here with what kinds of things you're going to do. I'm going to show you like the first prototype of tinsel, not even the first prototype yet, the sketch and the drawing, right? Like what I did first out the gate, it wasn't pretty, but like it got the job done. I will say, I am not a visual artist. You guys saw I sing. That is my art. So like even my little kind of chicken scratch sketches that I like eked out on a piece of paper, right? Like this was like literally me, okay, the thing that I want, like I imagine it is something like this. I basically had these chicken scratch sketches, and then I went to like Michael's, like the craft store, okay? And I bought beads and I bought clay and I bought like cheap $5 headphones, and I was like cutting them apart and I was putting them back together. I learned how headphones worked. I mean, like literally this is like a Frankenstein prototype. It is a far distance from the thing that you guys saw where I have a patent for it and all the flashy polished stuff. Like you can building block this together. And I would say that like no thing is too small if it is helping you answer the questions that you need, right? It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be enough to help you get feedback from the people who might actually buy your product, or who you like in the prototype stage, you might even be able to start selling your product to them at that stage if it is actually starting to address their problem, right? The goal is to get a tangible form of your idea, something that you can act on, something you can make decisions from, something that you're testing these assumptions and exploring these different ideas before you use too many resources, because this is like the really important thing that I want to like drive home, right? Like I hope that you guys are like writing down all these like different questions and stuff, or you could go back and watch the video. But like it's just important to know that when you are launching something with modest resources, you have to make up for like what you don't have money that you could just like take stabs at stuff and throw spaghetti at the wall and like see if this works or that works. You just have to be really methodical about knowing your business and knowing the people that you are trying to solve problems for, right? Like you can make up for that with knowledge and skill, but you have to know what questions you're trying to answer, right? So it's just really important to know that this is essentially like at the prototype stage, it's an experiment to prove or to disprove whatever it is that your assumption is around, like, if I do this thing, it will solve this problem, which people will pay me money for, right? Almost like Mad Libs that you want to fill in, okay? And then the next step is that after you have whatever that prototype is, you launch, right? This is the scary part, because you're going to put yourself out there in public in a way where your thing might be janky as hell, but that's okay, because the whole point is to answer those questions that I told you. Does anybody want this? Will they pay me money for it? And why are they paying me money? You don't want to put too much effort into trying to build the most ultimate amazing thing with all the bells and whistles coming out the door. You want it to be just enough to be able to like know what you need to know to move to the next step and know what little resources you have. That's what you're going to invest into doing the next thing that's going to make an impact for your business, that's going to bring in more money that you can reinvest in the business, right? So my guys, right? Step number 5 is get money. So, you know, as early as like the prototyping stage, like I said, you're going to have to start asking people to maybe hand over some cash, right? Remember, this is a business, not a hobby. That's the difference, is that like people pay you when you have a business. They exist to make money. So if you're not at least planning to like make enough money to sustain the operations of what it is that you're doing, goodbye. Like, don't pass go, don't collect $200. Like, just stop. You're just gonna like bury yourself in a hole, right? But if you've adequately like started to prove the answers to these questions, like this is true, this thing is helping people solve whatever that problem is. Once you've kind of started to get yeses or like prove that these things are true, you've started to figure out what's important to your customers. You started to understand what they'll pay you for and how quickly they'll pay you for it. There's just like, there's no greater validation than having a happy paying customer, Okay, nothing beats that. So you want to make sure you have enough of them to keep you in business, and even more so to help your business grow to whatever it is that when we said in that very first stage, when you were kind of envisioning what your kind of perfect ideal day scenario was, that you can get to that place, whether it is like quitting whatever your day job is so you can just sustain yourself, or whether it is having a mansion somewhere in the hills, I don't know, but either way, like the process doesn't really change. And this is where I want to also say that community piece comes back in. That part where I was talking about gathering people, right? Collecting info, starting to get on your soapbox and talk about the problem and talking about what the solutions could look like, and starting to position yourself as someone who might have the solution to that problem. These are the people who you are going to have first in line to try and buy your product, right? Now that you've been collecting their email addresses, their phone numbers, you can send out the email, you can send out the text message or whatever to say, come and get it, right? You're going to monetize them by asking them to pay for your service. Or if you want to like take a step in between that, you can maybe start to crowdfund from them, right? You can use a platform like an Indiegogo, like a Kickstarter, there's so many of them now, WeFunder, like equity crowdfunding, all kinds of things that you'll be able to do. But you want to have that group of people who've been like, yeah, she's been talking about this. I like this person. I want to support them. I'm going to buy the thing, or I'm going to like contribute to the GoFundMe or whatever, because they want to see that thing happen. They're invested in seeing that happen, right? So building that relationship with the community of people that are going to show up for you, it's important to do from day one. And then last step is execute and iterate, right? So you want to keep iterating so that money keeps growing as you kind of go back answering those questions. Does anybody want this? Will they pay me money for it? What are they paying me money for? You're going to keep tweaking and making changes to whatever your product is until you get it to that place where like you know what the answers are and you know how to repeat it. That's the goal, is that you can do that over and over again. And then if you do it more, you get more money. And then your money starts to grow, right? So you want to use those findings to make your product better. You want to do that over and over again. You're going to keep iterating. You're going to keep making your customers happy. You're going to keep creating value. You're going to keep that money flowing. If you're doing something, I want to say also, like that's more kind of business to business oriented, right? Like it's important to know that it's not just going to be the kind of transaction where, for instance, to take it back to like you're selling cakes. Somebody buys the cake, they're like, oh, I'm going to go home and eat that cake. That cake was good. And when they want cake again, they'll just come back and buy another cake. If you're doing things that are kind of highly relational service businesses or B2B businesses, those are much, much longer relationships where after you sell them the thing, sometimes that's actually where most of your work begins, right? Because you're going to want to make sure they're actually using your product, because they might have given you that money, but if you want them to come back and renew that next year and keep that contract, they need to keep knowing that your thing is delivering on it, right? If they buy it and then they're not using it, and then next year you're like, oh, time to give me my check again. They're going to be like, for what? Like, what did you do? Why? I don't need this. Thanks, but no thanks, right? So just thinking about those things, what do you need to do to kind of keep those relationships fresh? And, for whatever it's worth, if you are a person who is explicitly looking for investors to come and invest in your business, know that it is going to be so much easier to do that and get their consideration when you are making money. Like investors love giving money to people who do not need their money, right? So in worst case scenario, you can end up raising money anyway, but you're only going to be in a better position when you're already figured out the answers to the things that you can do. And you might just even have the option to not raise from investors and maintain your own ownership of your entire venture. So that is the presentation. That's a quick overview. And by quick, I guess not so quick because I've been talking for 30 minutes. I want to open it up for questions. Del, if I missed any important nuggets, please chime in. And yeah, we can just like kind of get into a Q&A now.
Thank you, Aniyia. And before we get into the Q&A, as people are thinking about their questions, start putting them in the chat so that we can answer them. The things that I would reiterate are, there's a difference between a hobby and a business. A business is making money, and a hobby you do for fun. It's something that you enjoy. But making a hobby into a business, which sometimes people want to do, also requires you to go through these steps. Do not think because, oh, I know how to quilt really well, or I know how to do people's hair, or I'm a great baker, or I already have this skill and I'm enjoying doing this thing, you can quickly turn that thing around and make it into a business. You still have to go through these steps because the business part of it all requires you to do that. So you might have a skill set, you might have a knowledge, you might have an understanding, you might even be really good at making a thing. And now you're looking to commercialize it. That's the business side of it all. You still have to go through these steps, no matter how good you are at a thing. So that's a perspective that I want to add, because so often people are like, but I already know how to do this. All I have to do is sell it. Well, the selling part is the business part, and you can't differentiate or try to negotiate those things away. It's not going to happen. You have to do the work. So are there any questions that people have? I haven't seen anything pop up in the Q&A, but I do want to point out that
I have some questions.
Oh, sure.
Oh, should I stop
know.
sharing my screen, or do you want me to keep it up?
No, you can keep it up.
Okay.
Here's my first question. I've taken some notes during the conversation that you had here. And I also saw some things that people were asking earlier. So I'm going to, let me start with this. One thing that I would like for Aniyia to talk about a little bit is talk about how to tell the story.
About the story of the business?
Correct. How you build, because I'm going to tie this into another question I had about the sizzle.
Mm-hmm.
Because, sometimes we talk about how we bring the story and the sizzle before we have anything that's really substantial, right?
Right. How
So
do you
build that?
those? Yeah, so I think that's a good question. I feel like there's definitely a point that a person can get to, because I think one of the things I should have said that I think is important is that you don't want to portray something about your business that is not true. Right? Like, don't be the person selling the miracle water that's gonna cure COVID when you know that it don't do that. Don't do that. Right? But I think that there's a difference between that and being a person who is going to kind of show. I always think it's important, and I think it resonates most when people get to know who the person is behind it, right? So that when you can kind of share what it is that's your journey. So remember, and I think hopefully people were picking this up. I was explicit about saying this, but the community piece, solve a problem for a community that you're from or that you have meaningful access to, right? In terms of the people. And the reason why I say that, there's a number of reasons, but one of the reasons why we say that so much is because you are going to know the people that you're talking to, how they think about the problems and how they experience the problems, so that when you tell them a story, it will resonate with them in a way where they're like, yes, they understand me and what I am trying to do. And that is why I want to give them my money to solve this problem, versus someone who just got here is just talking in some other kind of language, doesn't really understand anything, and is also still trying to sell you the same product. Right? So I think that there's an element to it that is about just creating human connection, because a lot of people are really not thinking about, honestly, a lot of people are having an actual emotional experience when they are deciding whether they are going to purchase something or not, right? And I think that there's actually something that we have in the boot camp. I was just looking over here because I'm do I have the slide easily available to me that I could pull up, because we actually have a piece where we show you these are the kind of 6 or 7 things that actually motivate somebody to buy something, right? And I'm remembering off the top of my head, some of that stuff is it might be a vanity thing, right? A self-image. This reinforces who I think I am about myself. Or maybe it's something about it's going to make them look cool. I don't know. Maybe it's something it could be all of these things that kind of come back to that. So in those stories that you're telling, people are going to want to see that. So when you sort of talk about, I'm making this up, if you're selling the cakes and you're just I don't know, you're going to tell a story about how when you were even 5 years old, your mom didn't have much, but you always had some flour, some sugar, and some vanilla and some eggs, and you started making cakes even then. This was a way for you to escape from whatever hardship you were having, or when just having a bad day, right? And that you've been making cakes for so long, you've perfected this special recipe that everybody loves your cakes, right? So I think that all of these are things that kind of can come into that story. Clearly I'm just making that up on the fly, but I think that this is the type of thing that people hear that and they're imagining a picture in their minds of this child who's just some amazing, like, you know, prodigy of cake making because they had no other choice and they want to support that. Like, that is the real thing that motivates people to spend money.
Yeah. And that also can go into things like branding and marketing and all these other pieces, but it has to come from the story that you want to tell, right? Because if you don't have that story, it makes it so much harder to do these other pieces of how you're going to market, what your brand is going to look and feel like, how are people going to connect with it, how are people going to engage with it, what kind of, you know, social media presence do you want to have? All of these things are tied together. But at the end of the day, you need to know what your story is and what kind of story you want to tell, what kind of people you want to gather around your product, so that when they do so, it becomes an organic thing and it doesn't feel like you're trying desperately to get at people's attention and or it doesn't feel authentic.
So what I hear you saying is that it's got to be real, it's got to be passionate, and you have to keep refining that story every time you tell it.
Yeah.
And I would say,
can I just say, like, different people respond to different parts of the story. Like, we can tell the same story about how Black and Brown founders became, how we connected, the work that we've done. And then I could say the same story in front of 100 people, and I can tell you 100 people are going to perceive it in 100 different ways.
So I'm going to put Aniyia on the spot here.
Okay.
I want you to talk about hair. We have some people that in the audience, they've been talking about hair and said, look, they're into hair and they don't know you got a background in hair, right? Yeah. Talk about it.
That is true. So I'm like okay. So I guess like the thing that I'm not sure if Kevin Williams has told you this, but I am in fact his daughter. Some of you might know that our family used to own a hair school and hair salons in Philadelphia. That is the family business that I grew up in. So from the age of roughly 3 years old, I was, put to work. I mean, even when I was like 5, sweeping hair off the floor at Donahue's. And it was a very important part of my upbringing. Honestly, it's a part of my story that if I go back far enough, even before the opera singing stuff, that I do also tell people about, that I grew up in a family business. It is a lot of the reason why I know so much about business today. And there's lots of stories that I can and do tell with people all the time about how my grandmother, Kevin's mother, was just a really important person who always believed in trying to like educate people and like teach us business from a very early age. Like from the age of, I don't know, I was probably like 10 and she had me like on some Mavis Beacon typing software, like you need to learn how to do this, right? So these are all things that I think are part of my story that I get to tell to people, that not only is like, a way to help create connection of like, maybe someone else who grew up in a family business might feel that and that might evoke something for them, but it also kind of starts to tell you a little bit about how I actually have the skills that will help me do the thing I'm telling you I'm going to be able to do. And so I think that's the other functional part of the story, because like if it can be missing or not have like the strongest thing about passion or an emotional experience, but at the very least you want it to be able to illustrate to people that you understand what you're doing and that you are the person that has the solution to the problem that you are about to solve for them and what they are about to pay you for.
Yeah. Can we answer the question, the Sheldon?
Yeah, I see there's, yeah. Can someone summarize it? Because I didn't actually do
okay.
that.
She has a question that is twofold. She has a son that raps and her eldest son manages him. From the info they've gotten from people in the industry, they've been told to start a record label and sign her son to it. I have questions about the business structure for a record label, as well as other contracts needed to sign other talent. I have a background in fashion design, so I have questions about business structure needed to sell merchandise. I want to know if there can be done under the same business structure or separate structures that are needed for a record label and merchandise related to the record label. And my quick answer to this is you need to find yourself a really good lawyer that can help you think through this sort of structure deal. I am not a lawyer. We are lucky to be in relationship to some lawyers, and I've done a lot of legal training for a non-lawyer, but I would say there are ways in which you can structure these things. But you should get a good lawyer, and you should know that this is going to be money that you're investing into the business. Setting up the corporate structure for something like this is really, really important. I would say for any business that any of you are going to do, whether it's the folks that are doing stuff on lingerie that I've seen in the chat, or the stuff that you've around hair, whatever your business is, you should have a corporate structure. You should incorporate, you should be working with a lawyer to help you do that. And you should see that as an investment in your business, because at the end of the day, having some sort of, whether it's a LLC or a corporate or a nonprofit, whatever that is, it helps you secure your business. But it also helps you as a human being make sure that if for some reason someone sues, someone's angry, somebody doesn't like, they're not suing you personally, and we're going to put you in personal ruin. Like, that's at the end of the day what a corporate structure does. So please keep that in mind. And I would recommend just finding a great lawyer that can help you think that through, and just see that money that you're spending, not as like, oh my God, I have to spend this money on legal bills, but like, oh, this is part of the investment of the work that needs to be done.
And so a follow up to that, let me real quick.
Wait. I want to add something to that before I forget. One, I was going to just say, I think it's also helpful to like, well, one, a lawyer, yes. And all of what Della said is true about corporate structures. For lots of reasons. One, because, you know, when you start to actually make money, you want to keep your personal money and your business money separate. You can't actually even get a business account until you actually have incorporated and formed some basic entity. And doing something like starting an LLC, it sounds intimidating. It's not that hard, and it doesn't have to be that expensive. It's pretty straightforward. But the other thing I was going to say is that finding someone who's in the music industry that might be willing to kind of mentor you on the best practices would be good there, because I am not I am a singer, but I have not started a record label. Like, I haven't done the business of music, so I don't have the actual advice that you need. But I would say that there's probably, like, I would guess that there's probably like a couple different approaches that you might be able to take. One, like if you're creating a record label, it might be to suggest that not only are you going to be signing your son, but you're probably going to also be signing some other people that might be talent that become part of your record label. The other part of it is like, you know, back to this kind of idea, like for instance, that Del was mentioning, like, you know, maybe your basic LLC, which is that like, if you are creating the business of your kids and your family, and like the LLC is all housing that, it can be the owner of the music and the masters and all of that stuff, and the merchandise and all of that stuff, and the management services and all of that stuff. So I think it depends on your goals with that business. Like if you're planning on having multiple people that are going to be on that record label, it's probably going to be a different approach than like, my child is talented, and not only is he going to be making like some amazing music, but we're going to be selling the t-shirts, we're going to sell the hats, we're going to make our own albums. Like all of that stuff can just be under one business as well. So that's just one way to think about that.
Thanks, Aniyia. I was going to get, and I'm going to add on to that two things. Number one, and I put something in the chat. Those of you who don't know about Will Toms, who is a local guy who started Rec Philly, is just blowing it up here in Philly. Matter of fact,
yeah, they were one of our partners.
Absolutely, he's one of the BBF partners. He's a partner of the Be Smart program. Reach out to him when it comes to artists and how to market that. The other thing is another partner that we have, I want everybody to be familiar with when we talk about the legal aspects. We have VIP Philly. And I want everybody to be able to, when it comes to what they do, is they will give you pro bono advice on how to build your contracts and structure your business. And so to support what Aniyia was talking about, you're not going to be taken seriously until you've done two things. Number one, you've got a tax ID number. Number two, you have an actual business, incorporated business. And don't let those things intimidate you. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to add that to the conversation.
I will also say too, sorry to like, now I'm like, we're all piling on to this like business structure stuff. The business structure is important. I also just kind of want to say, in terms of sequencing, this is my personal opinion. I'm like, so someone else might tell you a different thing, but I'm like, my personal opinion is that first, like all the stuff you see that I still have up on the screen, gather info, gather people, prototype, monetize, execute. I would say, don't worry about doing the incorporation stuff. I'm like, this is my personal opinion, until you've actually started to make a couple dollars. Because I feel like the other thing I see some people can kind of fall into the trap of is being so obsessive about having the corporate structure and having all the accounts and having all this stuff, but you're not making no money, right? So I'm like, first, like make some money, and then like, okay, now that I got something happening, like let me get the thing set up. And also you'll have a few bucks that you can pay the lawyer to get your stuff registered and all of that kind of thing. So I would say that you don't need to have the LLC before you start like launching and just trying to put your thing out there to see if anybody wants it and is going to pay you money for it. Once you know people will pay you money for it, then like make it your priority to get the corporate stuff set up. So
yeah, and these things can happen in parallel too. It doesn't have to be like 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes some of these things are happening simultaneously, sometimes one right after another. And I think that the incorporation kind of conversation can be happening kind of sometimes in parallel. As you're gathering the people, you have a prototype and you're monetized, it'll help you think that through. Kevin, should we go on to the next question? Benny Drummond has the next question up here.
So 2 things. I think the next question is still.
Well, there was also, sorry, there was also a question from Patricia about finding mentors in the school space around cosmetology,
yes,
which might be like also people that Kevin can connect you with. We still have some contacts in Philly around that.
Absolutely. But here's the next one that I wanted to inject into the conversation. And then what I want to do is I really want to get Del to talk about a little bit more about Chroma and specifically how BBF can support a lot of the people that we have on the call who have these ideas of entrepreneurship and what their next step needs to be. But before I do that, I'm going to put Aniyia on the step again. Let's talk about iteration. You know, sometimes we talk about it and we say this is what it is, but give us an anecdotal story about what that really looks like.
Iteration?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's like kind of a more intuitive way you can go about it, and there's a more methodical way you can go about it. We try to give people tools and to be a little bit more methodical about it in the boot camp. But I would say that like intuitively, it is thinking about those 3 questions that I mentioned, and then like until you have like, do you know the answer to that question, right? Like specifically, like, because I mentioned the 3 questions. Does anyone want this? Will they pay you money for it? What are they paying you money for, right? Like knowing the answers to those 3 questions. I would say that those are the 3 things that until you know, you are kind of keep iterating on. So in that first vein, it is like the folks that you gathered around you as your initial community, your initial audience that you then launched it to. Were they into it? Did they like it? Did they use it? What did they say? Like one of the other things that so to kind of bridge that into the methodical. So in the boot camp, we give you tools and suggestions for how to embed what we like to call feedback loops into your product. And feedback loops to me are everything. Like I could literally have just given a talk talking about feedback loops for this whole hour, because it is the thing that will help you get the answers that you're looking for, right? Like I think that a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean almost every entrepreneur I have ever met and encountered like falls into the trap of putting things out there without any like way of finding out what experience people are having with it, right? Like, so it's not just enough to be like, oh, I put this thing out there. Did anybody like click yes? Like, I mean, maybe it is kind of that, but maybe it's also just like, well, where did they spend time on the page? Like, did they like also spend time reading this? Did they go to that page before they made the transaction versus like, did they come and click buy or not, right? Because so many things can happen. Like you want to be embedding little like breadcrumbs for yourself to understand, like, again, how people are experiencing the product, because you want to know if it's actually solving the problem that they're looking for, or if it's something else. Like maybe the product does actually solve the problem, but your sign up flow is too complicated and they're just like, what? I got to put my social security number in there. I'm not doing that. And then they just drop off, right? So it's just like, these are the kinds of things. So I feel like feedback loops are just a really important thing. We have a lot of like frameworks and tools for you to kind of even articulate before you launch. What are the things that you are testing? Like you will know if this prototype is successful, if it properly solves this thing, or it does this thing. And here is the threshold. If this many people respond to it in this way, then it is true that it is solving that thing. So then you can either double down on that and make it more polished and better, or you can be like, oh, that didn't actually work. Okay, maybe I need to try it this way. And like the other thing that we try to take people through is multiple scenarios of thinking of how you can solve the problem, right? So that if you are going to make cakes, sorry, I don't know why I keep coming back to the cakes example. If you're going to make cakes,
be hungry.
Maybe it is going to be that time. Is that like we will help you kind of think through in the way that the bootcamp is structured. We help you think through who else is selling cakes and like what is their approach to selling cakes. What is the what we call kind of like the life cycle of the cake process? Because it's not just like you can like actually like, yes, here's a ready-made cake. You can buy it. You can also be thinking about, I don't know, maybe you just actually want to do cake classes. Maybe you feel like you should be selling the ingredients for other people to make cakes and the recipes. Like maybe you want to do cake parties. I don't know. There's like 50,000 ways that you can also sell people a cake, and like understanding which one of those combined with who the audience is that you're serving. All of this kind of helps you get into like a sweet spot, which is what in the tech world, they call it product market fit, right? It's like you're trying to find that real sweet spot where like the thing that you have and the thing that people want are like perfectly married together. And then that's the part where you just want to pour gasoline on it, because like that's where you're about to make a lot of money. Yeah. And before that, it's just trial and error. It's like the scientific method of like, you have a hypothesis, you're making a guess of what's going to happen. And then you have to test it by putting it out there and trying it. And it either worked or it didn't work. And if it didn't work, you go back and you try something else.
Awesome. So now I want to open it up again. I want to encourage people to ask some questions, and or better yet,
I was going to say, I want to call out Ebony's question, which I see in the chat about collaborating with an optician or becoming one. This is a good question where I feel like we see a similar version of this question when people ask about whether they should learn how to code to like launch a software product. Is a very popular like fork in the road that people find themselves at. And I personally say, I mean, if it's really important to you, like I told you guys, I learned about like how to put headphones back together and everything else. I didn't personally become a headphone manufacturer though. What I did was I found a headphone manufacturer who I could also like bring in to like create the kind of headphones that I wanted. So it's like, even though I might have had some basic idea of how headphones work, I was personally not the one who was like an audio engineer and who could like tune them and create the special like type of thing, right? So I tend to optimize for like, find the person who has the very, very specialized skill set, if that's something that's required for your business, and find a way to loop them in, find a way to partner with them. So like, even for instance, someone mentioned like doing merch, right? For her son who is the rapper. Like, if you know how to make merch on your own, like, oh yeah, I have a t-shirt printing press and I know how to design t-shirts. I'm about to make these shirts. We're going to make these rap shirts. It's going to be the bomb, all that stuff. That's great. If you are not that person, but you're like, oh, I think I know, like maybe we just want to put like his most popular phrases like on a shirt. And then like you can go and you can pick out the phrases. You can go on Fiverr, you can go on Upwork, you could probably find somebody at your church who knows how to like make some stuff on Canva and lay it out and make it look cool. And then you can go to like Printful or Teespring or, you know, Custom Ink and put it on a thing and you can print the shirts and make them, right? So you don't have to become a t-shirt maker, just like you don't have to become an optician. You just need to find the right people who can like come and show up and do like a piece of it. And if you don't have money to like pay them, but you can maybe cut them in part of the profits, like they get a percentage of whatever it is that you make, could be good ways to sort of barter and make deals while you're still cash strapped.
Awesome. Okay, two things. Number one, I want to make sure that everybody still has an opportunity to ask questions if you have those questions.
Wait, hold on. I'm like, oh, we got more questions. Now I'm scrolling down. Hold on, Caitlin. I'm like, I want to touch on all these real quick.
Can I just add one also to Ebony's question around, it's also a partnership question. So like, just as you answered the question about maybe I can make the t-shirts, maybe somebody else can make the t-shirts. It's also about partnerships. What kind of partnerships do you need to make your business possible, right? Not everybody can do everything. And sometimes you need to be in partnership with people who can do something better than you can. Like I know how to put together events because I've done a ton of events. But there are some people who are much better at event planning than I am. And so if I'm going to put together an event that's great, I'm going to come up with the ideas, I'm going to come up with the concept, I'm going to come up with the dates, the time, but then I'm going to work with an event planner that I think is much better than I am, because you always want to work with people who are more skilled than you are. And they're going to take that same idea and make it so much better than I could ever do it. Could I do it myself? Absolutely. Like I know how to do it. I've done tons of events. Push came to shove, but you always want to do the best that you can. And so sometimes partnerships are the best way to go about it. And so that's when you have to ask yourself, do we keep this in-house? In other words, am I going to do this? Am I going to put together this thing? What parts of this work are mine? And what kind of parts of this work are somebody else's work? And that's a constant conversation at the beginning when you're just getting started.
I was going to say, I think especially the other thing that you're bringing into the orbit, which is a thing we hear about a lot too, is folks get afraid of someone else stealing their idea and making their thing. So like to what Dell's point is, I'm like, instead, like Dell could very much be like, oh, this event planner is going to steal my idea. They're just going to do it without me. And like, sure, okay, maybe that's always a risk, but ideas are free and very cheap. Execution, on the other hand, not so easy. So I feel like one, the thing is like, there's always an opportunity sometimes to create partnerships with people where if someone does actually have a piece of the puzzle, like figure out how you guys get into business together and make money together. That's always my first like inclination. The other thing is the other stuff that we talked about with like you knowing your goals, your secret sauce, like what skills, what passions, what things, your community that you have relationships with, like those are also things that help to protect you. They kind of act as a bit of a defense, if you will, from people just going out and copying your stuff, right? Because then what if someone does go out and copy their stuff? Well, you know what? They're not in the church and the church people aren't going to buy their thing because they care about you, right? Like that story that we talked about telling earlier, the thing that people connect with, they want to buy it from you. They don't want to buy it from whatever, Safeway or whatever, because they want to support the local business or they want to be a part of this like journey that you're on when you were making cakes since you were 5, right? So those are all important things that I would just say, don't get too choked up on like, is someone else going to steal my thing, right? Like there are an infinite number of like toilet paper companies out there and all of them are making bank, I assure you. So the other one I was gonna, I wanted to address was structuring a visual business that creates developmental tools. This is a really cool idea. There's quite a few businesses that are like that you can find on Etsy. And I would definitely encourage you to, if you haven't already, just go around checking out how they do it, because I've bought, some random templates here and there where folks will essentially even go to like Canva is like one of my favorite tools because it's kind of a, you can use it like on a phone, you can use it on an iPad, you could use it on your computer, and you can design stuff and it gives you lots of elements to design within templates that give you a baseline thing that you can kind of create something really nice. But you can go and you can add your own touches and flourishes and combine stuff in different ways and make something that's very unique. And if you then wanted to kind of sell that as a template, so like, for instance, if this is like, I don't know, I'm making this up, screensavers people are going to put on their computer, or like maybe it's like the kind of thing that you're going to like put an image on your Instagram and it has this special like background around it or whatever, that like you can go and you can do that and you can essentially just create the assets or, literally like have, like it could literally just be like a PDF that has a bunch of links in it, and the links go to your like hidden templates. Once they download it, they pay you $5. They get a free, like a piece of paper that has a bunch of links. They click on the link and it takes them to your template that you made for them. Like it can be real simple and real cheap, and real easy to pop up. So I think that, Caitlin, your idea is a great idea. Kendra, my idea is to eventually make enough money to now afford Davidson in the future. Should I just teach myself to sell? Again, that kind of goes back to like literally anything you're trying to teach yourself from scratch is going to have a huge learning curve. I personally like encourage people to skip the huge learning curve of trying to like develop the skill. Start with the skill is that you have. If your skill is that you're really good at organizing people and helping them figure out how to do shit together, then find someone else who can sew and like get the operation going where you're making whatever you're trying to make. The other thing I would say too is that you can even look on, about sewing in particular, you can look on Yelp and probably find some local seamstresses in Philly, like, you know, people who do tailoring or whatever on people's clothing that they might buy from Nordstrom or something. And if there's something that you're trying to get made, you could talk to them, again, back to what Del said, create a partnership with them. Like if they're gonna help you make some hats or whatever, and like for every hat they make, they're gonna get like 30% of the profit or what have you. Like that could be a really great idea depending on what your business is. So throwing that out there.
But based on what you said, I'm gonna just clarify, 30% of the profit is not 30% of what you sell it for. It's what you make after you paid all your expenses. So if after you sold a hat for $100, if your cost is $70, you got $30 left over, you're giving them 10 and you're keeping 20.
Yep.
Just to get
and you can, yes, and you can even build it into your costing too, right?
Exactly.
So like if you want to say that for every $100 hat, they will get $30 of that, you can also just say that. And then you know that like, as long as your overall, everything else that it costs to make this hat lands under this amount, and I'm still making $30 for myself at the end, then that you can start to like extrapolate that into more math. Okay, then I need to sell this many hats to have this much revenue to be able to quit my job and like make this a sustainable business, right? Should you ask people to sign an NDA? That's a good question.
Before we go into that, because I think these things are tied, so I'm gonna like segue it, which is a partnership. Part of having a partnership is also having contracts, which is why it's also important to be in relationship to a lawyer. So there are verbal contracts of you have an expertise, I'm looking for this, how much are you going to charge me? This is, you know, this is how many units I need. There's a negotiation that happens there. And somewhere along the line, you should have a contract. Ideally, it could be one page. It just says, I will pay you X amount for Y amount of things. And this is when I will pay you 30 days after receipt, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You both sign it. Now you have a contract. Now you could verbally do all of these things. The problem is if things go sideways, if the person doesn't follow through, then you have no way of actually recouping any of the costs that you've put into this, which is why it's important to have a contract. Now, there's a difference between having a contract and having an NDA. An NDA is a type of contract. And that is why it's also important for you to be in relationship to a lawyer that can tell you, yes, an NDA is important for this piece of the work, but it's not important for that part of the work. And having someone that understands the business that you're in, what you're trying to do, they will tell you what is the legal standard. So for example, in the state of California, and Aniyia, correct me if I'm correct, but I believe that NDAs in the state of California for certain industries are no longer valid.
They are valid unless there is a circumstance of like discrimination or harassment under which an NDA can be broken as of, well, actually starting in January 1st of 2022.
But also a non-compete. Like, in other words, if I hire you to do something and then you do that thing and then you leave my job, you can't go get the same sort of job someplace else. That, for example, in the state of California is not allowed. So if you were to hire someone in the state of California, you would say, I need you to sign these kind of things. You need to understand I'm hiring somebody that's located in a certain place, and that contract I have with them is not valid. which is why it's important to have legal representation that it can explain these things to you, because ideally you're hiring people within your community. Ideally, you're hiring people that are part of the folks that are around you. But in an interdependent world right now with the internet, we're having this conversation with you over the internet. You could be hiring somebody halfway around the world. And so it's important for you to know what kind of contract can you have with that person based upon what is the thing they're going to do for you.
Yeah.
But let me just jump in here on the NDA conversation real quick, because I want to get people out of the habit of thinking that an NDA is this blanket coverage. Because
Agreed.
sometimes you have this attitude of saying, okay, well, you need to sign this NDA before I tell you anything about my business.
No.
And you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, because you still have to have trust and confidence in the people that you partner with potentially. And it's kind of like asking somebody to sign an NDA before you go out on your first date. You know, there's a certain amount of risk you have to take. You have to at least go out there and introduce yourself, get to know each other. So think about some of the things that you want to share, what's realistic to share. And I say this because I've had people who have come to the Be Smart program, and when we ask them about their business, they don't want to give up any information unless we sign an NDA. I can't have the whole class sign an NDA. See, now you're asking me for a one-on-one contract, and that's not realistic, because you're not paying me. So think about what an NDA is expected to do for you. But also, you know, you can get a lawyer to tell you what the NDA can and can't protect you on. But I can tell you this, that it can't guarantee you making money.
Yeah.
So
can we actually address, at least in my experience, where that desire also comes from, right? Like, so one of my first businesses that I wanted to launch, one of the first people that I kind of did a pitch to and that I talked to was my father. And my father's first advice to me was like, don't tell anybody about it, because they're going to steal your idea. That was the first thing he told me. He was like, oh my God, don't tell anybody about it. You got to. And that comes from a place of fear. One, he wanted me to be successful. And so this was coming from a great place. But two, that was terrible advice, because the reality is, as Aniyia said, people can have the same sort of ingredients and the dish will not come out the same. And I tell you, as someone who during the pandemic is now sick and tired of her own cooking, because I have been cooking so much at home, that not even my spices taste the same way for the same dishes that I've always done. But I'm like, oh, this doesn't even taste good to me, right? So it's like, you can have the same ingredients, but the thing that's going to lead you to success, the thing that's going to allow you to grow, the thing that's going to actually make your business like be successful, sometimes is getting the feedback and engagement from other people.
absolutely.
Sometimes having people say, oh, have you thought about this?
Yep.
Or I know someone that does this, and then you have a partnership with someone that you didn't know before and that you get along with. I think legal protections and having a structure is important, because I think boundaries are important as human beings. But don't let fear be the thing that drives you to try to think that having some sort of legal protection is going to free you from that fear. You have to like take on that fear, and you have to consider what that fear is about. And you have to take care of that fear as a human being, as an individual. Like, what is it that I'm doing? Where is this fear coming from? But no legal document is going to take fear away from the reality that you have. And it is a scary thing to start a business, especially when you really care about the thing that you're doing. If you're really passionate, if you're really interested, then it becomes even more precious to you, right? But that sense of ownership that you have, that's also like the biggest gift that you have, because not everybody's going to feel about the thing that you're doing in the same way.
That's awesome. And I'm gonna use that for a segue. I'm sorry, into
I'm like, I want to get a word in here too. Dang,
go for it.
can I say something about NDAs? No, I was just gonna say that I'm like, all the wisdom that they're giving, yeah, okay, it's all good stuff. But like, I also just gonna say that that none of these successes that I can point to that I've had, or really anyone that I've seen or met in my entire life, are someone doing something on their own. Like, to me, I think the idea of like being self-made is like not true. It's not possible. Everybody like has a village somehow, somewhere that like made happen, whatever they made happen. And like that, so that the thing that I feel like Del and Kevin are kind of bringing into the picture is this idea of trust. And like the fact that what we're talking about is, yes, exactly, solopreneur is a myth, is that like what we're talking about is promises and consent, right? Like we are talking about like the relationship between people where someone is promising something that they will do or not do, or someone is giving them, or you are giving them permission for something that they can do or not do. And like a contract is literally just writing those things down. Like, these are the things I promise I'm going to do. And like, I am giving you the authority to do this thing. And so even if like you feel like you're too broke to hire a lawyer or whatever, I feel like I want to come back to something that Del said earlier, just like, I would say if nothing else, like you can like write, like she said, write it down on a piece of paper in plain like English and both of you sign it, so that like you at least have something to go back to, because it is just, for human beings, it is like the act of having the commitment in a tangible way where you can go back and reference it and see it again, and not just having had it happen in a fluid moment of conversation where someone's like, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Like, you need them to write it down and like sign their name on it, so that you can come back to them and hold them accountable to that thing. That is what contracts are for. So the NDAs and all of that are kind of part of that general universe. Okay, that was
Absolutely. Thank you. So, and I know we're getting up against the end of our program tonight, but I did want to use the segue that Del gave me earlier to give her a platform to talk about Chroma and what you guys are doing at BBF. Because I know a lot of what you guys do is about sitting around the table and being able to collaborate, bringing other parties into the discussion to help build this community, right? You have your core community, that's BBF, but you also have a much greater community that is so awesome. So you want to talk about that a little bit, Del?
Sure. Thank you, Kevin, for that segue. I would say that our success as an organization has been really built upon collaboration and partnerships. I think it's just a way in which we think and engage with each other. And so I think that's one of the things that's been lovely about working with Kevin throughout the years, is that we're constantly finding ways to engage each other and to partner with each other, to bring each other's expertise in, to share each other's expertise. It's just, it helps us all kind of like bring up our game in an amazing way. So I highly recommend that you think of your business as an opportunity to do that. As Aniyia said, you could be making cakes, and maybe what you're doing is you're like, you know what, actually the actual thing about making cakes isn't exciting to me. It's putting together the recipes. Maybe you are the one that's selling the recipes. Maybe you're the person that's selling like the decorative pieces. There's just ways that you could be engaging with each other. So one of the things that we do at Black and Brown Founders is that we like to have events. And during the pandemic, we had a pivot to have everything to be online. And so we just had an event called Chroma. Last year, we was very successful. This year, you know, we're excited to have done it. It was last week. I'm very excited to be able to say this. Kevin, I will be sharing with you an exclusive code so that everybody can have access to all 3 days worth of content that we have. And so we have everything from folks who are legal experts, folks that are talking about partnerships, people who have talking about different kinds of businesses. How do you think about the legal formation? How do you think about if you want to have a storefront? What kind of real estate should you be looking at for you to think about that? We have investors that are talking. So we have about 20 speakers this last year. And we're going to be giving you a free 30-day replay, which means that over the 30 days, you'll be able to watch all the videos. And we're really hoping that you enjoy it and that you give us some feedback.